Shall we begin? Welcome back, everybody, to this afternoon's talks and panel sessions and presentations and so on. It's the DigiNab Day, Just Living Environments and AI for Social Good at Just Data Week here in Linköping Science Park at Go to 10. This session here is called Roofs Over Our Heads, Just Rooftops and Cognitive Cities, which seems like a really cryptic starting point for a conversation, particularly given what we've just been talking about. Nuno, I know that you've had your head
Andrew,
in
you've
rooftops.
frozen for me.
Oh, really? You have not frozen for me. Have I frozen
Now
for you,
it's
Nuno?
better.
Nuno, have I frozen for
Now
you?
it's better.
It's better now.
Better now. Okay, I'll do my best to remain unfrozen. So, Nuno, I was just saying that you've had your head very much in rooftops recently. Nuno is leading a project called Bauhaus of the Seas Sails, and he is an eminent professor at ITI Lisbon. Sheila, you are joining us. Sheila is many things, but she is a member of the New European Bauhaus High-Level Roundtable, and she runs a project called Roof Over Our Heads. Tom, you're going to have to talk to me a little bit about UN Studio, but Tom Minderhood is joining us from UN Studio, which you would describe thusly.
Yeah, so UN Studio is an architecture practice based in Amsterdam, and we try to be at the forefront of architectural innovation. We claim that our design is knowledge-driven, and in this context, we aim to be an agent for positive change through our architecture, through using data, just by creating things. So that's a short introduction from my side.
Fantastic. And everybody here, bar me, has a very deep understanding of architecture and architectural practice and what it means to build buildings and live in buildings and so on. Nuno, I want to talk a little bit about, very quickly, if you could start us off with, why rooftops? Why are we having a conversation about rooftops right now?
So, as you know, I'm coordinating one of the lighthouse projects of the New European Bauhaus, which is the Bauhaus of the Seas. I think it was probably the first project that tried to put the NAB in an unconventional space, let's call it like that. I think when the NAB was conceived, probably most people were thinking about the typical urban environment, our streets, our houses, our public spaces. And we, in a way, were looking at a different type of community space, which is our shores, our tidal lines, where a lot of the population of the European Union is living. More than 40% of the population in Europe lives in coastal areas. And now what we are trying to do is look at other unconventional spaces, other new types of public spaces that are not traditionally considered as places of governance in cities. And that's where the rooftops came as an idea that we've been starting to discuss. And we feel that like the coastal areas, which have very specific challenges and are very subjective to the consequences of climate change, for instance, we think that rooftops could be the next very important new type of public space where you could really have a big impact in how you could improve the quality of our cities, by making it through green spaces or making it collect more water, making it livable spaces in a very densely packed urban environment. And the fact is that most of us have roofs over our heads that we don't know how to govern. We don't consider them as public spaces. We don't consider them as spaces that we should be looking at, and as places where we could meet, where we could have an intervention that could have an impact.
It does seem very much like when we think about living spaces, rooftops are considered the upper limit of where those living spaces are, rather than a jumping off point. Well, not a jump, that's probably the wrong phrase to use, but a new place to think about ways of living. But Sheila, you have a project that is literally called Roof Over Our Heads. Do you want to talk about what your focus is when it comes to roofs and rooftops?
So thank you, Andrew. I work with people who live informally. We talk about them as people who are informal, illegal, and invisible. And most of the countries in the global south have 60% of people living in these conditions. And they are now dealing with extreme weather of too much wind, too much rain, too much sun. And this has deep implications on their life, their livelihood, their health, and their survival, because the existing roofs that they have are not able to withstand the extreme climate changes that are happening now. And as is the case of the world, because they are invisible and they are informal, nobody bothers about the kind of innovation, investment, and solutions that they need, especially because 98% of these 2 billion people who live in this condition design, construct, and finance their own homes. And they operate on what would constitute the residue of formal construction material and informal scavenged material, which was good survival processes in the past, but are now no longer important. So today, as one of the ambassadors for the Race to Resilience in the COP process, I champion informality. I'm also a member of the new Bauhaus, and I didn't know I could get funds to work on this from such a project. But if I do, and I think what I'm trying to do is to create conditions by which the innovation others, and that by doing what we call learning labs, where communities who are most vulnerable work in partnership with technical support professionals, young people in most ways, and produce innovations that we hope the market will pick up, because we're talking about 2 billion people now, which will become 4 billion in the next 10 years.
Wow.
So that's the concept of roof over our heads. And I really love the fact that others are also working on roof over their heads.
Fantastic. Sheila, thank you. Tom, may I ask you, as an architect, what are the affordances of roofs? There's the obvious, keeps the rain off. Nuno has spoken a little bit about places to gather, potentially. What else can roofs do?
I was thinking about it during the introduction from Nuno, because I think one of the things related to roofs is the issue of density in the city. So what I like is by activating roofs, he creates another layer, and indeed there can be different functions to use them. So it's a very valid topic, because globally, both in Europe and in the global south probably as well, it's also about land. Where do people live? What is the ownership? What can we do with our finite amount of resources? As an architect, I'm a big fan of building with density, but doing it properly. It's not easy. It can be informal, but usually it requires a degree of planning. And I think it's good to talk about these topics, because there I think we can build bridges and see what experiences we have in different places. I think that's also something that's very much stimulated throughout the EU. So we've been involved in those kind of processes, ranging from research up to planning for the past 10, 15 years. It's something we need to work on together.
Sheila, I'm going to come back to you very, very quickly and ask what is possibly the stupid question. Tom mentioned planning for high density and potentially roofs as a mechanism, or as something that can be leveraged in that instance. You work with informal communities. Is there a way that you can plan around informality, or is informality a thing that will just happen, and it is a good thing that it happens in that way?
So first of all, I want to say that informality occurs because we have very, very stupid, archaic, and pre-colonial planning instruments that does not acknowledge the volume of people who need to be in cities to service the cities. And in the absence of the entitlement to a minimum space and minimum planning instruments that allocate such spaces based on who should come, you have people who encroach and defend this space. So that's one. The second very important thing is people's roofs for a range of things. And what we are trying to do is to look at ways by which we acknowledge the manner in which the roofs are being used and produce safer, more insulated, and more sturdy roofing processes that we can produce through innovative use of materials, designs, and get acknowledgement from those who produce formal construction material that this is a very, very useful model, that useful constituency of consumers that they should also look at, because it's a very large volume of people who will use this. So I think that the important thing for me is, first of all, to actually celebrate the reality of how people survive in these processes, and how the whole education in architecture and engineering has completely ignored this group. So I'm battling with curriculum development, material development, people who set structural standards, that you ignore a very important volume of housing stock just because it doesn't fit into your preconceived notions of everything needing to be formal.
That sounds like a direct challenge to you, Nuno. We'll come to you next. When you are, because you are an educator and you are working in this realm of getting people to think about architecture and spaces and so on, I'm sort of aware that I have to bridge here a number of different cultures and a number of different ways of thinking about public space and private space and digital technologies and the new European Bauhaus. And Nuno, you seem to be the connecting thread between these things. So how do you make sense of what Sheila has just said in terms of the challenge with the 2 billion people living in completely informal surroundings to thinking about planning for urban development and building spaces in a very deliberate and planned way?
I have a profound respect for people like Sheila who have been doing this amazing work. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to make sure with the Bauhaus of the Seas is that we were not pushing a Eurocentric vision of what the new European Bauhaus was going to be. I think it's also an opportunity to really learn from the Global South about how people, in the case of the Bauhaus of the Seas, how people traditionally have been able to develop sustainable ways to relate to the ocean and the bodies of water in general. Mm-hmm. And I think the roofs, that's why I'm particularly interested in the topic of the roofs. And it might seem strange that you go from the oceans to the roofs, but to us, it makes perfect sense. Because again, it's an unconventional design space. And it's a design space where we can actually learn from these informal communities in the Global South who have been dealing with this problem because they need it. And they didn't have the restrictions of regulation and policy that we typically have in Europe, to try and bring that innovation back to Europe and perhaps, if possible, give back and pay back with new materials that are less energy or are more energy efficient. And I think this is, again, a type of space that could be a great area for cooperation between Europe and the Global South, because we need to learn with how these people are dealing with this problem. And again, I think that a lot of what we try to do in the co-design of the new of the Bauhaus of the Seas is this idea that we need to move away from top-down solutions and really look at locally tailored solutions done by the communities, which need to be adapted to their own needs, cultures, intercultural domains, which is something that we're trying to find one solution that serves north of Europe and serves south of Europe. We are the only lighthouse project coming from the south of Europe, although we do have pilot cities in the north of Europe. And I think, again, this type of exchange is very important. And having this, we published an article on trying to be critical about the new European Bauhaus ourselves. We didn't ask anyone. Ourselves, can we make sure that the Bauhaus of the Seas is not just bringing again a Eurocentric colonial vision of what the Bauhaus was. And on the contrary, it's an opportunity to reinvent and reconnect with the global south. So I hope that we can get funded to do this, and I hope that we can learn from Sheila and many other communities that have been dealing with this problem in very creative ways.
Well, it's certainly true that we have already learned a lot from Sheila. Sheila is not just a member of the high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus. She's also on the advisory group for DigiNab, and that is the context for what we're talking about here. But I do wonder, Sheila, about the digital technology aspect of this, because we are thinking about digital applications for these concepts that we talk about when we talk about the new European Bauhaus, and you come across terms like smart cities and digital twins and those sorts of things. How much does that factor into your work and your world? How much of that is a useful tool to what you do?
You're asking me, right? Because I don't know where you're looking.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, one of the first things that we were absolutely amazed is how quickly the women's collectives that we work in these informal settlements got comfortable with webinars, with different kinds of digital tools. And very interestingly, there were a bunch of people who were working on a digital platform. And I said, why don't you talk to our communities? And they basically said that when we go to either a Google search or any of these searches, the things that matter to us are never researched, and we never get answers for the things we want. Mm. And so very interestingly, we have started with a lot of very prestigious institutions and organizations with a small grant from Google to produce a platform which will begin to answer the questions that community women living informally want to know and understand about building materials, about designs, about minimum standards of construction safety, and things like that, and to communicate with people who will provide them informal building materials. So this is an ambitious project that seeks to stretch the imagination of what can be accessible for poor women in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and MENA, where we're going to have, in the beginning, 100 learning labs in 20 countries, each of which will be intensely local, but will represent a range of climatic challenges and different locations, but we give them huge opportunities to learn from each other, share with each other, and to use this digital platform for them to demonstrate to each other where to get things, what to do, how to negotiate with their cities, and everything that they want to do. But it's an open space for them to work on. And so we are looking at ways to look at that. Now, everybody wants to ask me, well, how will AI help? I have no idea. But I will grab somebody who knows something about AI and say, come into our world, talk to community women, and then tell us what we can do. And I think this form of crowdsourcing for a constituency that has amazing energy and commitment and is global is very, very, it's very invigorating and very, it sort of reduces the kind of angst that I would otherwise have, that climate change and the SDGs are all so top down. Resources never reach these communities. The knowledge never reaches their communities. They all get treated as basket cases that have to be actually invisible. So we find that our ability to transform people from their own aspirations is extremely exciting. And I would love to work with you on this, because a very large percentage of informal settlements are around water. And today, the cities are trying to evict them because it's unsafe for them to be near water. So it's like a bit of an oxymoron that the
Yeah,
only
it's
place they
fascinating.
can get is where other cities can't build their houses.
Sheila, I would add one thing to what you said is to invite these AI experts in, but then get them to ask questions more than they give answers. I think would be an important next step in that journey.
Yes.
Tom, I want to come to you slightly because you sort of maybe internally, but raised your eyebrows a little bit when you heard the term smart cities, and digital twins and so on. The phrase cognitive cities has come up recently, and I'm not even going to try and attempt to explain that. Do you want to talk about what this development is and where this is leading us? What does it mean?
Yeah, but could I just briefly react to Sheila, because I think she raised an interesting point, and for me it was about knowledge dissemination. And if you ask me what can we use AI for, I don't have the full answer. But coming here, it made me thought about this topic. And what I can say is that internally within our architectural practice, we're trying to use the AI to connect people within our practice. So we have about 400 people working with us. And what we found, if one person develops a good idea, it doesn't directly mean that everybody knows. So I think that's where we're starting to use this tool. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, it's still finding the best way to activate it. So that was a small remark. And then in terms of smart city, cognitive city, I think we've always had an interest in architecture that we call performative architecture. And it ties back to how do you make architecture measurable. So it could be something that's linked to, as you say, the insulation of a house, where the correct building of a house leads to a more pleasant indoor climate. Mm-hmm. And then linked to this, obviously, how do you measure it? There might be sensors involved, there might be data being produced. And this is linked to digital models, possible digital twins, smart cities. Mm-hmm. And what we've recently been talking about is cognitive cities, where there is an amount of machine intelligence that allows for interpretation of that data. So a city can actually start to respond to yourself. So there are different examples thinkable, but this is something we're quite interested in because it provides a degree of flexibility while you're looking at the planning, and I think that flexibility is required because you often try to look ahead, but you're not always right.
I'm wondering about. And hopefully I've understood you correctly in terms of how this information is gathered in terms of contributing to planning. But I wonder how much of that gets around the idea of actually involving communities in the discussion about what sorts of things should be built and what sorts of things maybe shouldn't be built. Is there a sort of an impulse to defer to technology rather than involving communities?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think it really depends on how you set up the process. We as architects like to involve as many stakeholders as possible through a process of ideation that might inform the strategy or the brief. But there are different conditions thinkable, and it's very much up to policymakers, investors, also clients, to involve the relevant parties involved. And as architects, we are willing to facilitate the process. Yeah, but we're only one of the actors that influences the people involved.
Sheila, can I come back to you just to sort of follow up on that? Because Tom says that it's up to the policymakers, the investors, and the clients, and the architects to involve the communities. What can the communities do that doesn't involve waiting to be invited?
Well, they're already doing without waiting to be invited because they are all self-built houses at the moment. I think that the last century has been completely obsessed with formal construction and destroying informal construction and It sort of produced a divide which is very detrimental to the challenges of now climate change and the SDGs that we all want to support and assist. And the real challenge is that development, and especially the global north, has this amazing obsession of saying, let development assistance go to rural areas so that people don't come into the cities. And if you look at the investment made in rural areas, it's not producing those things because we have a global economic order that pushes people into cities. So we have this sort of funny situation in which the informality, even in the global north, is expanding exponentially, and nobody actually knows what to do with that. So embracing reality as it is and using our skill sets, our insights, our sensitivity for being universally just has to produce new ways of accommodating these situations that in the past have been relegated to invisibility because we don't want to deal with it. And the global north has been brilliant at doing that. And there are lots of excuses why it can't be done, how it is projected through aid and assistance. I mean, you look at what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. You look at what's happening in South Asia. It represents almost where the next 2 billion people are going to come from into cities. And our cities aren't designed. We still, in most of our countries,
Well, we seem to have lost Sheila and Nuno momentarily. Tom, I want to come back to you then on something that Sheila just said, which was about the living environments and embracing reality as it is. And embracing reality as it is something that these days involves collecting a lot of data. And one of the context of this conversation is about this idea of just data and about being judicious, unbiased, safe, and transparent. How can you bring that that dimension of data into the living environment? What is a just living environment from a data perspective?
Yeah, so also I had to think a bit about this topic and also how it affects our day-to-day practice. So the principal thought I had about just data in our context is first of all from the vantage point of risk, meaning if we take data in the way that we're used to take it, by speaking to people, doing our research, gathering information before we start to make decisions, it's relatively well informed. Say with the use of machines, you run the risk that you manage to scrape more data, organize more data, actually let the machines take decisions, but then there's a risk that it might not be fully right interpreted. So it doesn't have to do with data protection or this kind of things. And the other thing that's very valid for us as architects is that we always have our intellectual property right. So what is for us very important is that the design we put forward, that is protected. So also there we need to be very careful, because if we if we give that task to machines, there might be a design that's actually sourced from other people's IPR.
Yeah.
So there are the two items where we have to be very careful. And then in terms of the just implementation, it really depends on who you're working with. So.
Well, as Nuno said, the rooftops is kind of a new and experimental space, in the same way that working with the seas and the oceans was for them an experimental space. So I guess there are different considerations that come into working with data in spaces that are new territory. What are the sorts of things, if you're an architectural practice or you're thinking about the built environment in this way, what are the sorts of things that you need to be careful of? Not just in terms of how can we protect our IP, but in terms of how can we not make things go terribly badly for everybody?
Yeah, so that's something we're researching, and at the moment it helps us a lot in our knowledge management. but there are clear boundaries of where we take this knowledge from. So there we remain at the careful side.
Tom, you were saying about thinking about just data within experimental and new spaces, new places to think about how you can mitigate against potential problems of not using that data correctly.
And this kind of technical condition is what we face a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Also in our daily practice. That's why we also try to meet in person as much as possible, especially talking about design. But yeah, so just data is for us starts to inform the architecture. So it can be from a very technical vantage point through scripting of facades or looking at sustainable aspects of the building. But it always boils down to a very practical human use of buildings. And there, since we work in different localities, so either in Europe or further abroad, it's always important to understand the local context. So, for example, in June we were in Mumbai. Turns out that the layout of apartments in Mumbai is totally different than what we know in Europe, just because they appreciate the fact that there is a natural ventilation. So that's the exciting part of interpreting that correctly. And until now, that's been done to a high degree by professionals. So you rely on your professional knowledge that you built up over the years. And by using AI and models, tools, machine learning, that's how you can accelerate it. But there's always this moment of people trying to understand it and judging what just should be. So that's where we stand. It's still it's a hybrid setup, human
Fantastic.
and machine. Yeah.
That sounds like a good place to leave it. Tom, thank you so much for your time. I know they're not here to receive it, but a round of applause too for Sheila and Nuno who have joined us for this. Tom, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for listening.